Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Forgotten Music Box. Holly Arnold stood on the cliff's edge, gazing out at the churning sea that surrounded the Isle of Wight. The waves crashed below with a thunderous roar, the sound barely audible over the howling wind. In her hands she clutched the small, intricately carved wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time. The brass inlay had dulled, and the key on the side gleamed faintly under the darkening sky. The box had been a gift of peculiar inheritance from her great-uncle, a man she barely remembered. She hadn't even known he had lived on the island until she received a letter from his solicitor, inviting her to collect her inheritance. All he left behind was this music box and his crumbling estate, perched precariously on the edge of a cliff. The house itself had been empty for years, its windows dark and its hall silent. Holly hadn't expected to feel drawn to the place, but something about the box had pulled her in, as if the tune it played resonated with some long-buried memory. She hadn't turned the key since the night she arrived, not since she had first heard the haunting melody. The music had begun softly, almost sweetly, like a lullaby, but as the notes grew, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air became thick and oppressive, as if the walls were closing in around her. She remembered the sensation of something or someone watching her from the shadows. But the music box wasn't just a family heirloom. Holly had learned that it carried a dark legend whispered about in a village below. The box had belonged to a child, centuries ago, a girl named Alina whose tragic death had never been fully explained. Some said she had fallen from the cliff behind the estate, others claimed she had been pushed by something unseen. But everyone agreed on one thing: the box had never played a tune again until the night Holly had arrived. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Holly felt the urge to open the box again. She wanted to prove to herself that the eerie events of the last few nights were nothing more than her imagination, a result of the house's isolation and her own growing unease. The first night she had awoken to soft whispers drifting through the halls. When she explored the house the next morning, she found it empty, yet there had been an unmistakable presence. The second night she heard footsteps outside her bedroom door, slow and deliberate, as though someone or something was pacing just beyond the threshold. The third night the whispers returned, louder this time, carrying fragments of a lullaby she had never heard but somehow recognized. Tonight was the fourth night. The air was colder, and a thick fog rolled in from the sea, creeping up the cliffs like ghostly fingers. Holly glanced down at the music box, her fingers hesitating over the key. Just one more time, she thought. She twisted the key, the soft click of gears engaging as the lid of the box creaked open. The familiar tune began to play, a slow, lilting melody that sent shivers down her spine. Holly held her breath as the notes filled the room, echoing through the house like a voice calling out from the past. The wind outside died suddenly, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Fog pressed against the windows, obscuring the world beyond. Holly stood frozen, watching as the shadows in the room shifted, seeming to stretch and lengthen. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a fleeting glimpse of something in the corner. She turned, her heart pounding, but nothing was there. The melody continued, the notes growing darker, deeper. Holly's gaze fell to the box, and for a moment she thought she saw a reflection in the polished brass, a face, pale and sorrowful, staring back at her. The eyes were wide with fear, and the mouth was moving as though trying to speak. Her breath hitched, and the room seemed to close around her, the walls warping and twisting. The shadows thickened, creeping across the floor like inky tendrils reaching for her. She stumbled back, her hands shaking as she slammed the lid of the music box shut. The music stopped abruptly, but the silence that followed was worse. The whispers returned, louder now, closer. They were coming from the hallway just outside the door. Holly's skin prickled with cold dread as the door creaked open. The fog spilled into the room, and within it a figure began to form, small and delicate, like a child. The figure stepped forward, its features becoming clearer with each step. It was the girl from the reflection. "Alina," Holly whispered. The girl's eyes were wide and glassy, her hair hanging in damp, tangled strands. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Instead, the melody from the music box began again, though the lid remained tightly shut. The haunting tune filled the room, louder and more distorted than before. Holly backed away, her pulse racing. "What do you want?" she asked. The girl raised a hand, pointing toward the box. Her mouth opened, and this time a faint whisper escaped. "Find me." She stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The shadows twisted around her, pulling her toward the door, toward the fog, toward the child who had died so many years ago. She fought against it, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what Alina wanted, but she knew she couldn't stay in the house. She had to get away, get off the island before it was too late. But the music wouldn't stop. The shadows wrapped around her ankles, pulling her down. She clawed at the floor, her fingers scraping against the cold wood, but the darkness was relentless. The fog enveloped her, cold and suffocating, and the last thing she saw was Alina's pale face, watching her with empty eyes. Then everything went black. When the villagers found Holly's body the next morning, they said she had fallen from the cliff, just like the girl all those years ago. The music box was never found, but the villagers whispered that they could still hear its haunting melody on the wind, carried through the fog that clung to the island like a shroud. Some said Holly had been cursed, that the spirits of the past had claimed her, just as they had claimed Alina. Others believed the box had a mind of its own, choosing its victims carefully, playing its tune only for those it wished to call. But one thing was certain, the music never really stopped. It played on, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the next soul to listen. And on quiet nights, when the fog rolled in thick and heavy, the haunting notes could still be heard drifting through the village, calling out to those who dared to listen. For the box was never truly forgotten. It was merely waiting to be found again. The fog rolled in heavier that night, settling over the village like a suffocating blanket. People whispered of the cliffs, of the old estate, of Holly Arnold's tragic death, a death that mirrored Alina so closely it almost seemed intentional. Some villagers stayed indoors after dark, shutters drawn tight, as if they believed that closing themselves off could somehow protect them from the eerie melody that haunted the island. But not everyone heeded the warnings. In the pub at the heart of the village, a group of friends sat huddled together, their voices low but excited. They had heard the stories. Of course everyone on the Isle of Wight knew about the music box, the cliffs, and the strange deaths that had occurred over the years. But they didn't believe in curses or ghosts. To them, it was just a tragic coincidence, wrapped up in a legend meant to scare children. One of them, a man named Tom, leaned in closer to the group. "I say we go up to the estate," he said with a smirk. "See if we could find this music box everyone's talking about, maybe even take a listen." "I don't know, Tom," one of them said, his voice faltering. "People say once you hear it, you don't come back the same." Tom laughed, the sound loud and dismissive. "Come on, you're not really buying into that, are you? It's just a box. How dangerous can it be?" The night was cold as they trekked up the narrow path toward the estate. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world in a dim, grey light. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest whisper of music, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible, like a distant echo of a forgotten lullaby. The house loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the cliff. The front door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing the empty halls within. The air was damp and heavy, and the sound of their footsteps echoed unnervingly off the stone floors. "Where do you think it is?" one of the friends asked. "Upstairs, probably," Tom replied. They ascended the staircase, the old wood groaning beneath their weight. The house felt colder as they reached the second floor, and the faint music seemed to grow louder, as if beckoning them forward. They found it in the master bedroom, perched on a dresser near the window of the small, intricately carved music box. It looked as if it had been waiting for them. Tom approached it with a grin, reaching out to pick it up. "It's just a box," he said. Nothing scary about it, but the moment his fingers twisted the key, the air grew thick, heavy with a sense of foreboding. The music began to play, the same haunting melody that Holly had heard on her final night. The friends stood frozen, their eyes wide as the tune filled the room, seeping into their bones. It was beautiful, but there was something deeply unsettling about it, as though the notes carried with them the weight of centuries of grief and loss. Tom's grin faltered, his bravado slipping away as he felt the oppressive presence that had settled over the room. He tried to close the box, but it wouldn't shut. The music played on, louder now, the melody warping and twisting into something dark and unnatural. And then they heard the whispers. At first, they were faint, like a distant conversation carried on the wind. But as the music grew louder, so did the voices. They weren't just in the room, they were everywhere. In the walls, in the floor, in the very air around them. "Do you hear that?" one of the friends whispered. "What the hell is that?" The shadows in the room began to move. Faces appeared within them, pale, ghostly faces with wide, empty eyes. They watched, unblinking, as the group stood paralyzed in fear. Tom backed away from the music box, his hands shaking. "We need to get out of here," he said. But the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, sealing them inside. The music grew frantic, the notes dissonant and jarring. The shadows stretched toward them, reaching out with unkind tendrils. One by one, the friends screamed as they were pulled into the darkness, their voices blending with the haunting melody. Tom was the last one standing, his back pressed against the wall, his heart racing. The whispers grew louder, swelling around him like a chorus of lost souls. And then, in the corner of the room, he saw her. Alina. She stood there, her pale face expressionless, her eyes locked on the music box. She raised a hand, pointing toward him, her mouth moving as though she were trying to speak. But no words came. Only the music. Tom stumbled forward, reaching for the box. He had to stop the music, he had to make it stop. But as his fingers closed around the lid, Alina stepped forward, her cold, spectral hand reaching out to touch his. The moment her hand made contact, the world around him dissolved into darkness. When the villagers found the bodies the next morning, they were scattered across the estate, their faces twisted in terror. The music box was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. But the whispers persisted, echoing through the village, carried on the wind. And on quiet nights, when the fog rolled in thick and heavy, the haunting melody could still be heard, calling out to those who dared to listen. For the music box had not been forgotten. It was still out there, waiting to be found again. Waiting for the next soul to claim. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.